When I first moved into the neighborhood, I had no idea that my biggest battle would be with the homeowners association. I had chosen my house because of its quiet, suburban charm, but it didn't take long before I realized that the HOA was more of a dictatorship than a community organization. At first, I ignored their ridiculous rules, thinking they wouldn't bother with minor infractions, but I was sorely mistaken. My lawn was my biggest offense. Sure, it wasn't the greenest, and maybe I let it get a little longer than my neighbor's perfect golf course-like yards, but I didn't think it was a crime. That all changed when I received a sternly worded letter from the HOA, demanding that I cut my grass immediately or face fines. The letter was aggressive, listing every rule I had supposedly broken, even citing specific inches my grass had exceeded. I found the whole thing absurd. Why should it matter if my lawn was a little longer than my neighbor's? Who was actually being harmed? Despite my frustration, I tried to be reasonable at first. I trimmed the lawn slightly, but apparently, it wasn't enough. Within days, I received another letter, this one even more threatening, stating that I would be fined daily if I didn't comply fully with their standards. The arrogance in their words pushed me over the edge. I wasn't going to be bullied by a group of overzealous suburban overlords dictating how I maintained my property. I checked the HOA's bylaws, expecting to find some leeway, but instead, I discovered an entire section dedicated to lawn maintenance, complete with diagrams, approved fertilizers, and seasonal expectations. It was suffocating. That's when I realized something crucial. The rules demanded that my yard be clean, uniform, and aesthetically pleasing, but nowhere did it state that it had to be grass. If they wanted a pristine lawn, they would get one, but not in the way they expected. The idea came to me in a moment of sheer defiance. What if I replaced my entire lawn with something undeniably clean, uniform, and extravagant? Something so over the top that they would regret ever pushing me in the first place? That's when I decided I would pave my entire lawn with gold bricks. Not just any paving stones, not decorative rocks or artificial turf, actual, shimmering, solid gold bricks. If they wanted uniformity, I'd give them the most extreme, jaw-dropping version possible. The more I thought about it, the more I realized how much I loved the idea. It was absurd, it was excessive, but most importantly, it was within the rules. There was nothing in the HOA guidelines that banned golden bricks, and I was about to exploit that loophole to its fullest. I made up my mind that very night. I wasn't just going to fight back. I was going to do it in style. Once the idea had taken root in my mind, there was no turning back. I wasn't just going to trim my lawn, I was going to obliterate any trace of grass and replace it with something that would make every member of the HOA lose sleep at night. However, turning this wild idea into reality required meticulous planning, an outrageous amount of resources, and a level of patience I wasn't sure I possessed. My first step was research. Gold bricks weren't exactly something I could pick up at the local hardware store, so I had to figure out the best and most efficient way to source them. I considered direct bullion dealers, private collectors, and even international markets. The prices fluctuated, but I calculated that I would need at least hundreds of bricks to fully pave my yard. A single gold brick weighed about 27 pounds and measured around 7 inches long, meaning I would need thousands of pounds of gold. The cost? Astronomical. But I wasn't worried. Between a well-diversified investment portfolio, years of strategic stock market plays, and a few lucrative ventures, I had more than enough to spare. After finalizing my calculations, I reached out to a precious metals supplier who initially thought I was joking. When I confirmed my request and wired the necessary funds, there was a long silence before they simply said, "We'll get it done." Of course, I wasn't going to do all the labor myself. I hired a team of professional contractors who were more than willing to take on a high-paying, albeit bizarre, project. When I explained the plan to them, their reactions ranged from stunned disbelief to outright laughter. One guy asked if I was trying to summon a pharaoh, another joked that I was building a shrine to excessive wealth. But none of them backed down. They were professionals, and I was paying very well. Within days, the first shipment of gold bricks arrived, securely delivered with armed security guards watching every move. The sight of pallets stacked with shimmering bricks on my driveway was almost too much to process. My neighbors, curious about the unusual activity, began peeking through their blinds and coming up with their own theories. Some assumed I was installing a high-security vault, while others whispered about whether I was some sort of underground billionaire. Then came the demolition. Every last blade of grass, every inch of soil, was stripped away. My yard became a barren dirt patch, an empty canvas waiting for transformation. The HOA, likely thrilled that I was fixing my non-compliant lawn, had no idea what was coming next. The paving process took weeks. Each gold brick was meticulously placed, lined up in perfect symmetry, creating a dazzling surface that glowed under the sun. The sheer weight of the gold made the entire foundation incredibly sturdy. This wasn't some fragile display. This was a full-fledged, high-end golden yard. As word spread, people started stopping by just to stare. Some assumed it was a temporary art installation, others took pictures, but no one could deny that it was the most extravagant yard in the neighborhood. The contractors, now fully invested in the ridiculousness of the project, took extra care to ensure every brick was polished to perfection. When the final piece was laid, I stepped back and admired my work. My lawn was gone, replaced by an unbroken sea of shimmering gold. No weeds, no overgrown grass, just a perfectly uniform, aesthetically flawless golden landscape. And best of all, every inch of it followed the HOA's rules to the letter. The moment my golden yard was completed, the neighborhood was thrown into complete chaos. It wasn't just my next-door neighbors who were gawking anymore. People from across the entire subdivision, and even from outside our community, started driving by just to catch a glimpse of the infamous gold-bricked lawn. Some took pictures, others stood in silent disbelief, and a few even knocked on my door to ask if it was real. The reactions were as varied as they were dramatic. Some people thought it was the greatest thing they had ever seen, while others, mainly the HOA loyalists, looked like they were about to pass out from sheer indignation. I could see it in their faces. This was not what they meant when they demanded that I fix my lawn. At first, there was silence from the HOA, but I knew it was only a matter of time before they responded. I didn't have to wait long. Less than 48 hours after the last brick was placed, I received a letter, not just an ordinary HOA notice, but an urgent summons to a special meeting with the board. The language in the letter was full of veiled threats, warnings about violating the spirit of the community, and references to potential consequences if my property didn't align with their expectations. I had to laugh. Nowhere in the HOA guidelines did it state that gold bricks were banned. In fact, my lawn was clean, uniform, and aesthetically pleasing, the very criteria they had demanded. They wanted a pristine landscape? I had given them the most pristine one imaginable. But I wasn't going to back down, so I went to the meeting, fully prepared for battle. The moment I stepped into the HOA boardroom, I was met with an immediate barrage of accusations. The head of the HOA, a sour-faced woman named Karen, yes, really, practically exploded the second I sat down. "This is outrageous," she hissed, slamming a copy of the HOA rulebook onto the table. "You know very well this is not what we meant when we said to fix your lawn." She glared at me, waiting for a reaction. I simply shrugged. "I followed every single requirement," I said, keeping my voice calm. "You asked for a clean, uniform, and aesthetically pleasing yard. Well, here it is, arguably the most uniform and aesthetically impressive lawn in the entire neighborhood." The other board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly caught between their own outrage and the undeniable fact that I had obeyed the rules to the letter. Karen wasn't ready to give up. "Gold bricks are not an approved ground cover," she snapped, flipping through the HOA guidelines. "The list clearly states acceptable materials: sod, mulch, gravel, and decorative stone." I smirked. And what is gold, if not an extremely decorative stone? That sent a ripple of murmurs through the board. A few of them even glanced at each other, realizing that technically, I had a point. Karen, however, was livid. "This is setting a bad precedent. What if everyone starts paving their yards with precious metals?" I leaned forward. "Are you telling me you expect multiple homeowners in this neighborhood to suddenly start investing millions into gold landscaping? Because if that happens, I think property values might actually go up." A few chuckles broke out among the less hostile board members, which only made Karen angrier. She tried throwing out a last-minute rule interpretation, claiming that my yard didn't fit the neighborhood's character, but at this point, she was losing control of the argument. Realizing she was out of options, Karen played her last card, threatening to issue fines anyway, even though I hadn't technically broken any rules. But I was ready for this. Before the meeting, I had already spoken with a lawyer who specialized in HOA disputes, and I made it clear that if they fined me unfairly, I would take legal action. I even hinted that I might go public with the story, and I knew the last thing they wanted was for the HOA's ridiculous overreach to become a viral sensation. The room fell silent. They knew they had lost. Begrudgingly, the board was forced to concede that my gold lawn wasn't technically against the rules, and while they might hate it, there was nothing they could do, at least for now. I walked out of that meeting victorious, knowing that I had beaten them at their own game. After my victory at the HOA meeting, I expected the drama to die down, but I underestimated just how much attention my golden yard would attract. At first, it was just curious neighbors stopping by, shaking their heads in disbelief or sneaking a few pictures from their cars. But within days, my house became something of a local landmark. People I had never met before were pulling up just to stare at the sea of gold gleaming under the sun. Word spread fast. Someone must have posted pictures online, because soon enough, journalists started reaching out. First, it was a small local news station, but then bigger media outlets picked up the story. Before I knew it, my house was on multiple news sites with headlines like "Man Fights HOA with Gold Lawn" and "Wins," and "The HOA Nightmare That Turned into a $1 Million Statement." Social media exploded with comments ranging from admiration to pure jealousy. Some people called me a genius, others accused me of flaunting wealth in the pettiest way possible. I even had a few emails from wealthy investors and celebrities asking if I could design something similar for their properties. But the real fun started when my property values skyrocketed. Real estate agents were practically salivating at the idea of selling a home with a literal golden lawn. Some even suggested that my house could become an attraction for luxury buyers, a one-of-a-kind property that would shatter market expectations. I wasn't planning to sell, but the idea that my petty revenge had accidentally made my home one of the most valuable in the entire neighborhood was deeply satisfying. The HOA, on the other hand, was having an absolute meltdown. Not only had they failed to punish me, but now my gold-paved yard was driving more attention to the community than they ever wanted. Some board members even started getting complaints from other residents, claiming that my golden lawn was ruining the neighborhood's aesthetic. Of course, what they really meant was that it was making their own boring, perfectly manicured grass yards look cheap and unimpressive in comparison. Then came the copycats. As much as Karen had scoffed at the idea of others following my lead, she was dead wrong. A few wealthy homeowners, inspired by my bold move, started making their own upgrades. One guy down the street replaced his entire driveway with polished white marble, while another resident had a solid quartz fountain installed in his front yard. Someone even jokingly suggested that I start a luxury home renovation business specializing in HOA loophole landscaping. But not everyone was thrilled. A few of my more traditional neighbors despised the attention our community was getting. They accused me of turning our once peaceful neighborhood into a tourist attraction, and some even petitioned the HOA to create new rules specifically banning gold paving. The HOA wasted no time drafting a new amendment, attempting to impose a ban on excessively reflective surfaces and non-traditional ground covers. They even tried to grandfather in the rule to force me to remove my golden bricks. But once again, they underestimated me. I lawyered up immediately, ready to fight back if they tried anything underhanded. The battle wasn't over yet, but I knew one thing for sure: no matter what they threw at me next, I was not backing down. As expected, the HOA wasn't about to let me get away with my golden masterpiece without a fight. After their first attempt at intimidation failed, they resorted to their last desperate move, pushing through a new rule banning all non-traditional ground covers and claiming it could be enforced retroactively. Their goal was obvious: they wanted to force me to remove my gold bricks and replace them with their preferred choice of grass, mulch, or gravel. The irony was almost too much to handle. A group of people who once demanded uniformity and aesthetic beauty were now going out of their way to outlaw something cleaner, more uniform, and objectively more valuable than any other yard in the entire neighborhood. It was laughable. But while the board might have thought they had the upper hand, I already had a counterattack ready. First, I consulted my lawyer again, who immediately flagged their attempt at retroactive enforcement as legally dubious at best. HOA amendments typically cannot be applied retroactively unless explicitly stated in the original governing documents. Since the original rules made no mention of what I had done, trying to force me to remove something that was fully compliant at the time of installation would likely fail in court. I had a strong case, and I was fully prepared to sue them into the ground if necessary. But just to be extra thorough, I found an even better loophole, one that would guarantee my victory permanently. Instead of fighting the HOA in court, I outmaneuvered them completely. I filed to have my golden bricks classified as an art installation. Under local zoning laws, permanent outdoor art installations fell under a different set of regulations than standard landscaping. That meant that even if the HOA wanted to argue that my gold bricks violated their aesthetic standards, they now had to fight a completely different legal battle, one they weren't remotely prepared for. To strengthen my case, I even hired an artist to officially design the layout of the bricks, giving it an abstract, geometric theme with a fancy name. By the time I submitted my paperwork, my gold paved yard was no longer just a yard in the HOA's eyes, it was now a legally protected work of art. When I presented this information to the HOA at the next meeting, the look on Karen's face was absolutely priceless. She went through all 5 stages of grief in real time: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and finally, acceptance. No matter how hard she tried to find a way around it, my golden yard was now untouchable. The board had no choice but to drop their fight. The official ruling? My property was now classified as a permanent art installation, and the HOA could do nothing about it. My golden yard wasn't going anywhere. With their defeat now cemented in history, the HOA finally backed off. The rule banning reflective surfaces still passed, but it had no power over me since my gold bricks were grandfathered in as a protected structure. Not only did I win, but I ensured that no one else in the neighborhood would ever be able to pull off something like this again. It was the ultimate act of pettiness and strategy combined. In the end, my golden lawn became more than just a personal victory, it became a legend. Years later, people still talk about it. It even made it into a few books and HOA horror stories online, with some calling it the most expensive act of revenge in neighborhood history. Every time I look out at my shimmering front yard, I remember one simple lesson: if you're going to fight back against ridiculous rules, do it in a way so grand that your enemies will never recover. And most importantly, if an HOA ever demands you cut your grass, make sure you give them something they'll never forget: